Many business owners talk about the benefits of having a business coach. But what a lot of business owners who appreciate this coaching don't talk about is how to find a coach. And not only that, with specifically a coach, but how do you build a community of business owners around you to create this idea of sharing knowledge amongst other business owners instead of trying to do everything yourself and learning from different mistakes? Cody Rich is our guest today, and he has created what he thinks is this idea of creating a community around you of different business owners. He has created something called the Rich Ideas Lab, and what they do is they have a sense of community and a sense of involvement from a bunch of different industry experts to help businesses and business owners in their business. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the Better Business Podcast, the podcast that helps you improve your family-owned retail business. My name is Steve Cook. I'm a third-generation business owner, and with the things I've learned and talk about on this show, I've taken my family's retail business to over $10 million in sales. Now let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Better Business Podcast. My name is Steve Cook, and today my guest name is Cody Rich. Cody owned a semi before he could drive a car. He is a farm kid who started building internet companies as a way to spend more time hunting and doing what he loves. He enjoys helping people step off the hamster wheel and start enjoying their life while building the thing they love. One of the primary ways he does this is through his podcast, The Rich Outdoors, where he talks about business and hunting. Cody is a walking contradiction. He is in crypto. He's in internet marketing. He's in subscription boxes. He's in podcasting, but he is a hunter and an outdoors person. Cody, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I almost cringe. I hate writing my own. I hate talking about myself, all that stuff. So I just like cringe when I hear my own bios and stuff. But no, it's all good. I'm stoked to be here, man. I love talking business. Everyone knows me as talking hunting. So when I get to talk business, I feel like I kind of come out of my shell a little bit too.
Yeah, we talked about that on your podcast, how it's unique that someone would combine business and hunting, but when you find somebody that is interested in both, they are 100% your target audience. I think that is probably one of the most unique podcast genres or subjects that you could combine into one, but somehow you've done it.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it started as a hunting podcast, and naturally I'm into entrepreneurship and things, and so I started talking about stuff like that, and feedback from the audience was like, so it turns out a large portion of my audience also owns a business or has small business ambitions and things like that, and so it naturally just progressed into that's what I'm talking about, and there was definitely people that are like, oh, I followed you for hunting, only talk hunting. And it's like, no, thanks. I'm just going to do me. And you're welcome to join. But if not, then that's fine too. I don't care.
How many episodes, 500 and something episodes in, how many episodes in are you so far?
That number doesn't even
over 500.
We have an entire other show that we stopped with the number. So it gets super convoluted in a certain way. So it's 550-ish, but we also have a Patreon only feed. And the Patreon only feed used to be on our main show, and I was doing 3 shows a week, 6 months out of the year, which was really good for growth. And, it was great. But then it was I had to okay, either I need to hire more people to help with this, or we need to do something else. And so I was just going to get rid of it. And then my producer was like, well, people are doing really well on this Patreon thing. We should just throw them on Patreon and see what happens. I was like, okay, fine. Because the alternative is I just stop doing 3 shows and we just go back to 1. Well, long story short, it was 2019, we put them on Patreon. And so since then we've done Patreon, and I have a co-host for that one. And so we do another show a week there. So I don't know, there's another 100+ episodes that are, not numerical in order, whatever, from the other podcast. So yeah, long story short, we've done a pile of podcasts.
So let me kind of talk about the subject that we're wanting to get into today, and this new concept that you've come up with, the Rich Ideas Lab. And to kind of preface that before we get into that conversation, talk about some of the businesses. Obviously, the podcast is a business in and of itself, and so I don't want to, downplay that at all. But talk about some of the other businesses that you have started since you've gone out on your own.
Yeah, and so there's always like this, where do you stop? So my first company, like it really got me into entrepreneurship, was an ammunition company, which I was kind of just working at. I was actually doing special effects and doing really cool stuff. And we had this ammo company, and I read the 4-Hour Workweek. I was like, cool, this is what I want. Like I want to build companies and go hunting all the time. So I built that company and ended up selling that one. I actually started the podcast before I sold that one. Started the podcast to figure out what was next. Then the podcast became its own thing. That launched another company, which is Backcountry Fuel. Along the way, there's probably a boulevard of broken dreams, also known as my GoDaddy account, where I like started some businesses and, like all those. But those are, I guess, the successful ones, if people want to say that, you know what I mean? And so there's kind of a laundry list of companies that I've helped with, consulted for, worked on, all those things. But those are my three. And there was like a short gap where I had all three going at once, and it was quite the headache. And so, as Backcountry Fuel is kind of like matured, and it's about 4 years old now, and I don't have to do a ton with it. It's just, I feel like it's on, I wouldn't say autopilot, but for the most part, it's doing well. I don't need to do a ton. And the podcast is, a great tool for networking and building and growing your personal brand or another brand. It's its own thing. And so now it's like I got the bright idea that I'd launch a new project to figure out what was next. And that was like the Rich Ideas Lab, which, is like we talked about, I started out as a hunting podcast. I wanted to talk more about entrepreneurship as I kind of got older. And I feel like that was kind of just a natural growth. Like I didn't feel comfortable talking about entrepreneurship when I was in the heat of the battle and, just trying to figure it all out myself. But essentially I've spent the last 10 plus years enveloped in entrepreneurship, trying to figure this out. And, I'm from a super small town, I always say just a dumb farm kid who was trying to figure this internet stuff out. And so kind of as a way to give back was like, okay, how do I create a better system than what I went through? How do I create the best resources, the best community for all the people like me who just, like, you're from a small town, you just don't have a ton of people that are like on the same boat. Like you might have some like mentors that were entrepreneurs, but like me, it was like, yeah, they all built companies, but not internet companies. And so like I would get advice, but it would be like very different than like the modern advice, or just any advice along building, in an internet land or in internet companies and things like that. So, I wanted to build this community that was like surrounded with people who were doing cool stuff and have great ideas. So the Ideas Lab.
I have to ask you, you mentioned the 4-Hour Workweek last time we talked, and this time, have you ever asked Tim Ferriss to be on your podcast or anything?
No, I have not. No. I feel like Tim was like an idol that I had for a long time. And you know what they say, like, don't meet your idols. And then like I knew some Silicon Valley people that were like, yeah, you probably don't want to meet Tim. Like he's like not as cool as you think. I don't know for sure. I've never met the guy.
Really?
Yeah.
I could see him being super quirky and just kind of like not relatable, I guess.
Right. And I don't know if that's it or what, but yeah, no. It's the short answer.
So tell me, the Rich Ideas Lab, obviously that was born out of your desire to talk more about business, but kind of explain the concept of what that is and how that can help someone.
Yeah. Well, I say, yeah, it's still a work in progress, man. Like I'm really good at launching and then building. And so like, that's kind of how
we're a couple days in, right? I mean, this is incredibly fresh.
Yeah. Well, what started as like, I wanted to like, okay, maybe we'll create a course and like teach people how to do these things, but that wasn't really good enough. And what stemmed from doing a course, we did like a cohort course, was these things called jam sessions. And it was just me, like, people would bring an idea, or I'd have an idea and I'd be like, okay, here's how this would work itself out or whatever. And so like the reference to hunting would be like, I could teach you how to hunt deer, but there's a lot of nuance when you're two experienced people are talking, right? And they're like, yeah, but here's the problem you're going to have. Or like, here's what, yeah, we could focus on this, but not on this. Like, you could boil hunting deer down into like a 10-step program, but the reality is it's much more complex than that, so to speak. And so like I was like, okay, how do we take jam sessions and make them scalable? And that's kind of what I always think about. I was like, how do I make this scalable? How do I make it bigger, right? And so even a cohort teaching session was like, okay, that was a good test run, but how do we make this scalable? And that's where the ideas lab was like, how do we keep jam sessions going? And then it was like, that stemmed into, okay, what is the best thing for an entrepreneur from a small town? How do I fit that person? And so instead of like thinking about what product I want to sell or all these things, it was like, how do I make the best thing for a small town entrepreneur, whether they are interested in entrepreneurship, whether they're interested in a side hustle, whether like they have a construction business or whatever, like they want that lifestyle freedom that we all kind of strive towards. And so like, what is that? Like, okay, if I had to narrow it down, I'd be like, okay, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. Surround yourself with people who are going there, right? And I don't know if you ever heard the term. I remember it very vividly because like someone told me early in entrepreneurship was like, if you want to be in this world, you have to surround yourself with that community. Like, and that meant moving to Silicon Valley. I wasn't going to move to Silicon Valley. And so like, how do you do that? We have the internet now. Like how do we surround ourselves with like a community of people who are like trying to all achieve the same goal? And that aligns us, right? So I think that's super important. I think, there's a concept of like, people in entrepreneurship have more ideas than time. And that is 1000% true. I remember being an early entrepreneur and thinking like, oh, I just need a good idea or whatever. Now I can rattle off ideas like daily. And like there was a point where it was like not a good thing because my wife was like, I swear if you start another company, like that's it, we're done. You know, like just it's almost comical. And so now it's like, okay, we can just spit off ideas, but there's something about you and I bouncing ideas or what's going to work or what's not, that like if you're just listening in or a part of the conversation, you're going to take so much from, right? And so like that's the second piece of it. And then the third piece is like, how do we provide all the resources? When we were doing that cohort, we did this thing on like how to launch a product. And I was rattling off all these tools that I use or like websites and things like that. And when you're new, you're brand new, I mean, heck, even if you're like been doing this a while, you may not know all the tools that other people use and things like that. So like, how do we actually have all the resources, the courses, the tools deck or the tool stack, like all these things like that are available to the world that it's hard to keep up with. Like I want to make the best resources. So that's why I think at the Rich Ideas Lab, again, I'm saying like, we're still building as we're going. So end of the day, I want to make the best resource possible for small town entrepreneur types who want lifestyle freedom, right?
And we talked about before, it's for someone who is fresh out of the gates starting, or for someone who wants to build on top of what they already have. They need a fresh catalyst to take them to the next level or whatever, right?
Right. And, you know, like, I don't know, like I've been a part of a lot of these things, and like, do I need ideas? I don't need ideas, but like you always hear, you know, I'm going to listen to a podcast and see how a company, you know, pivoted their thing into doing something, and it might spark an idea that sometimes even unrelated completely. But, you know, like you could be talking about, you know, something you did at the feed store, and I could be like, oh man, that's clever. How could I implement that in my business? Right. And like, so you're just always thinking like, yeah, if you think you're in business and you got it all figured out, like the door is closing around you. Like that's the one thing is for sure. Like that's because everything about business is ever evolving, right? Like you could be like, it's the same entrepreneurs that told me like, oh, you got to go to trade shows and you got to do this, and you got to do this, you got to get into Cabela's when I had an animal company. And I was like, no, that's actually not where I want to go. Like that's the opposite of what I want to do. You know, and like they thought they figured it out, right? And then slowly that door closes, because if you're not evolving and changing and growing, I mean, your business is going to run into a dead end eventually.
Yeah. Do you think that you were talking about getting around other business owners and around people that you could say are a step above you in business, and you're trying to get some of that creativity from them. And I think a lot about that too. And I try to do that. That's part of why I have this podcast, is so I can talk to other business owners and people that are successful and get new ideas or ask the questions I want to ask about business. And do you think that I read a book one time that was talking about creativity, and he said that he thinks, the guy in this book, he's a pretty famous photographer named Chase Jarvis. I don't know if you have heard of him, but he had talked about how he thinks creativity is a muscle, and the more you use it and the more you develop it, that the better it becomes. Do you think that creativity is a muscle, or do you think that people are just born genetically with good business ideas?
No, 100% it's a muscle. What was the book you're referencing? Because it might be the same book I was thinking of. Do you remember?
I can't remember. Creative Calling, maybe, or Creative something. I can't remember.
Different book, but it's very similar. There's a book called Steal Like an Artist, and I really love that book. And essentially, I do think that creativity stems from solving a problem, right? And the more problems you've solved in the past, then the more creative you become. Another great book is called The Generalist. And it talks about how, like, coming up with creative solutions has more to do about the width or the broadness of the solutions or the problems that you've solved in the past, right? And so let's take, for example, like pretty avid hunter. I spent a lot of my life thinking about hunting and whatnot. I'm also very much in entrepreneurship. So if you and I were to go do a new project, say we were going to build an app, like obviously I'm going to come up with solutions to problems very different than even an app builder, right? Like, 'cause he's solved a lot of these problems repetitively. And when you think about like someone who's done the same thing over and over and over, like they tend to they're efficient at solving the answer, but sometimes they don't come up with the most creative answers. So when you have multiple inputs, and this is kind of coming from that like Steal Like an Artist, is like you need to take all of these pieces, right, and then make them your own. Like in my course, I teach you this concept called Rip, Pivot, Jam, and I stole it from someone. I don't remember who. I don't remember who. It's called Rip, Pivot, Jam, and it's like I want to take something that's working really well, and then the key to this is like pivoting it to something that's uniquely you, and then going and jamming on it, right? And so this is how we solve a lot of problems. Is we get good at like, okay, I've solved different problems in different categories in different ways. That's going to bring a knowledge to me. And so like, yeah, like you said, are you born with it? No. Like maybe some people are, but for the most part, it boils down to like all your past experiences.
Dude, I think that's so true, because when you look at a successful business person, and let's say they are very successful in something very old, tried and true. You know, I think about a lot of our business. You could talk to a very successful feed store. Maybe they have a chain of feed stores. I've met several business owners that have 20, 30, 40 feed stores before, and they're decamillionaires. You know, they've done very, very well. But when I ask them about, you know, hey, we're working on our website, or we're working on a subscription this or delivery, you know, certain things like that, they're completely clueless. And I think that that's a very good point, that a lot of people are very specifically good at a certain set of specific skills. And so the more people's input you can get around, like you said, an app or a website, or, you know, perhaps whatever that person's expertise is, that is what can help you in different little tiny nuances, which can help you break through certain things. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to belittle that as, MBA types, right? MBA types go to school to learn how to manage a business, how to make it more efficient. Creative types aren't that way. Like there's definitely types of people, right? There's types of people who have, the right brain versus left brain, right? There's more creative types, and there's more, management types or processes types. Like I think, to be a great entrepreneur, you have to have a good blend of both. But I think a lot of times, like you talk about the people who can take one model and then rinse and repeat it very well, like, any kind of franchise business, right? Like, okay, what we did here, boom, let's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. That's a skill set, right? Like it's very hard to do. I think the hardest part in the world is almost saying no to all the other things. And like there are people in this world who are successful because they're so good at saying no to everything. They can just basically do the same thing over and over and over and over, right? That's 100% not me.
Yeah.
You just have to go with what you're good at, right? And like coming up with creative solutions and finding things. I do think that a lot of those, it just depends on what you want out of life, but like a lot of those that NBA types, I don't want to pick on NBAs, but like the NBA types that are good at rinse and repeat, right? Like they're creating this like.
Well, NBAs are getting drugged through the mud here.
I don't want to like just, but I've if I had a better term, I'd use it, but work with me here. So like, basically rinse and repeat the store model until, it gets to a point. Well, that's great if you get acquired and it gets acquired by some juggernaut company and you kind of walk away from it all. But I do think that time and time again, there's a reason that the Fortune 500 list turns over like whatever 20 years or something, where it's like companies. They get big and then they get complacent and then they kind of wane away. That's happened a lot. And unless you have a bunch of innovation, like you're not going to. And so as a like small business owner and the type of businesses that I like to build, I think it is about trying to find that creative trend, if you will, like the next thing that's working, right? And staying on top of that. Because at the end of the day, like I'm not in business to work 100 hours a week every week and become more efficient. That just doesn't appeal to me.
You've mentioned this sense of community. You've mentioned a coach. I think you were talking about a coach before we started recording. What is your take on a sense of community? If you are looking to build a community to help your business specifically, I don't mean, for friendships or whatever, or hunting or anything like that, but just specifically to help your business, what do you think some of the key players are or key people to have in that community?
Are we talking front end or back end?
Well, I mean, if you wanted to have the best, as good of a business as possible, and you wanted to build a group of people to give you advice or coach you or to help you, what kind of people do you think it's, experienced entrepreneurs? Do you think it's people that have a coaching business? Do you think it's marketing people in big companies, or what are kind of some of the fundamentals of that?
The opposite of all those things you said. I have friends that are marketers in big companies. Like they have their way. Like I don't think of those as the most creative people. They're more like efficiency types, right? And they know it works and they do it well. And there's something to be said for that. If I wanted to, and it all depends on success. Okay. So, if like hypothetically, like say you and I were in a mastermind, or I was coaching, or whatever you want to call it, I would say, what's end goal? That's my first question, because like everything is determined on end goal. Like, what do you want? Like, Steve, what do you want? Like, what's end goal? Like to own a big ranch, walk away from it all? Do you want to like legit, like what's the question? Like what's the answer? What's your end goal?
I mean, my end goal would be to build either collection of businesses or multiple different businesses similar to a conglomerate that might offset each other. So some might be a slow growth like a feed store. Some might be very exciting, but it's very risky. Mm-hmm. Some might be, in a different industry or something like that. But that's my goal, is to build a book of businesses. So that way I feel like it's a little bit safer for that reason.
Yeah, so you're real big on stress. You want more stress. No.
Exactly.
No, I think that's good. Like I have cash flow businesses, I have equity businesses and things like that. And so when I think about, and this is something that I've kind of gone through, is like, how do I build a team around what I want? And so when I think about coaches, like it's super hard to hire a coach, because you have to go through this like almost like first date. Like, I don't know them, they don't know me. How do I even trust that they're giving me the best? And so usually when we go shopping for coaches, we're like, okay, has this person done exactly what I'm about to do? Then they probably have the answers, right? But the reality is that a coach is someone who is going to help lead you to the answers that you already know. And they're going to like help you reduce the amount of devil's advocate that is within you already. And so many of us, like, I don't know, maybe it's all the people I know that in entrepreneurship can argue both sides of, what they're about to do or not do very, very well. And I'm sure you've experienced this where you're like, yeah, but if I did this, like, for me, it's like, I'll talk to my wife and be like, I think this. She's like, okay, yeah. And then I'll argue against her. And she's like, well, you're just arguing on both sides. And I'm like, yes. So what's the answer? And so a good coach is going to help you walk you into your own answer, and help you feel like that's the decision you want, right? Or maybe point out some things that you're not seeing. And it's not like you're gonna go to them and say, hey, how should I structure this acquisition deal? And they're going to tell you. There's coaches for that, but at the end of the day, I think they're few and far between. There's a lot more coaches that maybe you're not going to agree with completely, or you're just not going to, I don't want to say respect, but you're not going to like have enough invested in that relationship to take their advice, right? So when I went to a coach, it was someone that I just used to BS with about business, and she's absolutely crushing it. So I'm like, okay, like, hey, I got a deal for you. You're gonna help me. I'm gonna help you, and we're gonna like this will be the deal we work. And so finding someone that's just gonna help you get through those answers, right? I think that's important, but I also think it's important to surround yourself with people who are better than you. Like if you want to move into a category, right? Like how do you find people who are one step above you, and how do you provide value to them, right? So like, you and I may look up to, I'll just use Tim as an example. It's not a great example, but we'll like say someone like Tim Ferriss, right? And like, okay, so how do I provide value to Tim Ferriss, right? And then how do I get within that circle? And that's a really tough one because there gets to be a certain level where there's probably not a lot of value you can do.
Sure.
I look at some other entrepreneurs and say like, okay, maybe they're big in investing. If I could bring a few investment deals to them, maybe then I could build a relationship, right? So that brings value to them. And then in turn, they can, bring value to me and we can build a relationship because everyone is vying for their attention or for their time, right? And so, I do think those are two big ones, like having someone you can bounce ideas off that you trust. And number two is building your network of people around you that think bigger, are doing bigger, and like have maybe already been there, like in some capacity, like, yeah, they've built some businesses, they've sold some businesses, they are where you want to be. And I think that's going to naturally help you gravitate towards that position.
So if it sounds like you're getting way far away from just the person that's on whatever Instagram that calls himself a business coach. Seems like you're talking about somebody who is an entrepreneur that has been successful, and perhaps you can have some sort of trade out, some sort of value that you can give to them to establish a relationship. But I guess my biggest question is, how would you say someone besides saying join the Rich Ideas Lab, what would you say would be the best way to find a person like that? And if you say just Google it, business coach, I'm going to punch you.
That's the opposite. Don't ever Google business coach. Like if someone shows you like number one on Google for business coach, like newsflash, probably the wrong place to go. Dude, I honestly, I'll tell you, I have no idea. What do you think I built the Ideas Lab? It's like, it's a tough one, man.
Yeah.
And it's
hard to find.
This is kind of like, not to get into the Ideas Lab, it's like, this is why I built it, was because when I was new, I joined every mastermind. I was in a bunch of groups. I was in these meetup things. Like I host a meetup here in Bozeman. And that was kind of homage to I went to a lot of meetups. But the problem I always had is that none of these people were like me. And not in a bad way. It was just like, there wasn't any common ground. And that can be tough because it's like, as you know,
yeah.
If you build a business that's different than everyone else around you, you feel like you have nothing in common with them. You have nothing to relate to or whatever. And to some extent, the only people building lifestyle businesses when I was coming up were people that were like these, laptop nomadic types that were building, clickbaity websites and living on the beach, and they had some core e-course for Facebook ads, and they were living on the beach and stuff. And so I would go to these meetups and just nothing in common, and it was just oh well, your business is very different. And I'd be like, what about this? And they're like, oh no. And so it was just tough because I didn't have a ton of people, which I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say going at it alone is the best way, but sometimes it's just, that's what it is, right? I mean, did you have mentors?
What do you think? Mine's tough because I've always had my dad as one of the persons that I look to the most for, answering questions as far as a business, well, and probably everyday life. But that's probably who I look to the most in asking business questions. And
do you guys
I
have disagreements on like, okay, here's how the new school way is versus the old school way?
Yeah, all the time. And what's awesome is he always, even when I wasn't even part of the business, I was just, kind of managing, he always gave me the leeway to, okay, well, try it, as long as it wasn't a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, decision or something. But it was always just kind of like, try it, we'll check the score later,
Yeah.
And so that was always, and a lot of people aren't that lucky, but I think that I struggled with beyond that relationship. I know a lot of people that have businesses and things like that, and not to sound arrogant, but there's not a lot of people that have the size business or in the same industry. They might have the same size, but it's in a different industry or something like that. It's very hard to find that person that has a business like you're talking about that is similar to yours.
Right. Which I think can be it can be a crutch in a little bit, like to be like, oh, well, that's just not the same. And I was guilty of that too, of being like, well, yeah, but you just don't understand my business. We all think that, like, yeah, well, mine's different, or this reason or that reason. Which, I do think there's a lot of commonalities as you get to know, multiple businesses, multiple industries. You're like, oh man, there's a lot more in common than there are apart, And I think there's macro trends that follow most businesses. Now those may vary between, like, say, e-commerce and say a physical store, and things like that. Distribution, all these things are a little bit different, but there's a lot of similarities.
I feel like you have a knack, just kind of bringing it back to business. The target audience for this business is family retail businesses. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I think family retail businesses do the poorest is having a good presence online. And I feel like you have a great knack for that. What do you think is the biggest miss when you see, let's take a hardware store or even a feed store, or a boutique or something like that, when they try to begin an initial presence online, whether it's a Facebook page or Instagram page or a website? What do you think is the biggest thing that type of business would do wrong?
Oh man, I love this question because you're 100% right. Most mom and pop stores, retail, they don't have an online presence. They don't see a need for it, right? And then they don't know how to do it. So it's like, what's the point? Why do I need an online presence in Cleveland when only people in this store or in this region within a mile, right? But I think there's a lot of capabilities to build brand and to build that know, like, and trust offline, even if it's only in a local capacity, right? That's the one thing I think everyone's missing out is talking about repeat purchases, right? And most people do it wrong because the instant they go, okay, why do I need to email us so I can spam them? And they send really crappy emails, right? No. Why you should have an online presence is because all of your customers are online as well, and you can build a relationship and add value in an online capacity that's only going to increase the bottom dollar of your walk-in purchases, right? And so let's just take Al's hardware store, right? So what can Al's hardware store do for that local community to keep engaging with them, to keep kind of up to speed, keep top of mind, right? And so that's one of the things you want people to think of Al's hardware store when we're coming in or when I need something, right? And so a lot of people will just go straight to online and say run Facebook promotions or follow us online. Why would I follow a hardware store online? I need a really compelling reason to follow a hardware store on my Facebook page. So how do we do that? This seems like a lot of work right out the gate. You're like, well, we have to start a whole nonprofit for our hardware store just to be, unique online. And the answer is there's somewhere in the middle. And I think it's really important to to gain that relationship, to gain that know, like, and trust, but then to be top of mind. Like, the top of mind shouldn't be your number one reason. It should really be an afterthought or a byproduct of doing all the right things. It's no different than being courteous as in the store, right? Like, if a customer came in and it doesn't really affect your bottom dollar to be nice and courteous, other than the fact that they might come back, they might like that store, so they'll keep coming back, right? So the same concept applies to online. Like, how do we just, we're doing the right thing now, so it pays forward later. Instead, a lot of these mom and pop stores, they go on and like, hey, follow our Facebook page. They don't give them a reason to follow the Facebook page. And then all the Facebook page does is like, hey, we're having a sale. Here's a discount, like all these things. So they just take the wrong approach to it.
What do you think in your business with the around subscription? What do you think that a retail store could learn from a subscription-based business? Do you think that there's any ties there? Do you think that there's any things that you could learn from that?
Yeah, 100%. I'm a huge fan of subscription-based businesses. That stemmed from when I built my first company. It was an online ammunition store brand, and what I got from that was like every day, the first or every first of the month, the sales had to restart. It was like I was going and had to get all these new sales to keep the lights on, right? And it just became like on the first, basically the second of the month, I was like full sprint mode again, and it was like that's obnoxious. Like, we shouldn't have to do that to keep the lights on. So I wanted a subscription box. And I built a subscription, and I realize now, having built both, that a subscription is a beautiful way to help you conserve brand. What I mean by that is that subscription businesses or subscription income, that reoccurring revenue, allows you to keep, let's say, your overhead. So if I was in any business, I would say I want enough reoccurring revenue to cover all, employees, brand, or all the utilities, all those things. Like, that's what I want. I don't necessarily need
fixed expenses.
Yeah, your fixed expenses. That way I can focus on building the brand the way I want to and doing the right thing by the customer instead of always trying to get sales. Because in any business, you're kind of balancing between brand and sales. You're always trying to create this like premier brand or this premier whatever, and then you're also like, okay, we got to get enough sales to keep the lights on. And I think a subscription is a great way to kind of relieve the pain of sales, to be less salesy. And I think by doing that, you create a better brand, which creates better or more sales down the road. And so let's take Al's hardware store. So if I was Al's hardware store, how could I think about products that would do on a subscription basis? So let's just take the top 5 SKUs that people use all the time and give them a discount and push them towards, hey, set this up on a subscription and, you'll save this amount, blah, 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 blah. Maybe you don't have to come into the store, which sounds counterintuitive, right? You're like, well, I want them to come in the store and get this thing. But just to work the kinks out, we put them on a subscription, and now they're getting this. And so now all of our fixed expenses are covered. And so we can focus on growing our community, our brand awareness. And by doing that, now we're not like every single month being like, okay, we got to sell enough lumber. We got to sell enough nuts and bolts to make the ends meet, right? If you could be picky and choosy, like, yeah, the higher the margin on the subscription, the more discount you can give on them to really incentivize that and push that. So I think there's definitely room for subscription type reoccurring revenue in almost most businesses at the minimum.
Your point about the pushing people not to come into the store made me think of there was a documentary that was actually done about gas stations, that there was this huge turnover in people that owned gas stations in around the time that the pay at the pump deal came out. And what a lot of gas stations said is, hey, we don't make our money on fuel. If we do pay at the pump, they're not going to come in and actually buy all the crap in our store that we get a lot higher margin on, and we'll go out of business. And so what a lot of fuel stations actually did at that time was they resisted the pay at the pump because they thought that would kill their business. And what ended up happening is that no one even wanted to go there to get fuel because they knew they couldn't pay at the pump. So not only did they not sell the gas, but then no one came in the store either because they didn't even go to the gas pump. And, you know, it kind of made me think of that same thing that I know that I've been guilty in our business of, you know, sometimes saying, hey, this wouldn't be a great way to, you know, do this because this might kill our business. But like you said, if you just do what you think would drive the most sales, oftentimes it'll work itself out in the end.
Yeah. And I think that stems from, you know, it's easy to look at numbers and say like, okay, well, here's, you know, we're massaging the numbers. How do we get the most out of each customer, blah, 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 blah. But what numbers don't tell you is the relationship you have with your customer. You know, does the customer feel like you're giving them the best value? Are you providing for them? And I think more than anything is like these retail stores in small towns, like that's 100% what they should be focusing on. We can figure out how to monetize that later, but you have to build a relationship. That's a part of the brand, right? And so like no different than my brand is online, I have to build that by giving 51% value. If I had a store and people were coming into that store, I have to build that brand, and that brand is the know, like, and trust that the customer feels when they come into that store, right? So by all means, like if you only had robots in your store and, you know, and sales signs everywhere, right? And like you brainwash people as they came in to buy more, like on paper, that makes sense, but like it's not going to last very long, right? And so like, what's the longevity of these things? And so like, how do we increase that value over time and work on that brand and focus on doing the right thing by the customer?
I had a guy named Jesse Cole on my podcast a while back, and he owns a minor league baseball team called the Savannah Bananas.
You love that guy.
And have you had him on?
No,
yours?
Me too.
You should, man. He was super fun to talk to. But anyways, his kind of like tagline, what he always says is create fans first and figure out how to make a profit second. And I mean, he literally like walked me through some of the numbers on their gear, like their merchandise and stuff like that. And he was like, literally, we lose more money when people buy this stuff. I mean, it was almost like scary. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You know, but he literally just like does what's right. He thinks what is right and tries as hard as possible to create fans. And then he says that he can figure out the numbers later. And
right.
Anyways, whether that's the complete right idea or not, I don't know. But, you know, I think if you look at his success, you can't argue with how big of a brand that he's created with the Savannah Bananas.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be careful on which products and which things you choose. And like, you can be clever about that, right? Like you can choose there's certain products in your inventory that have higher margins than others, right? There's certain products that people, you know, if you gave away for free or at a discounted price, wouldn't really destroy you, but would add a lot of value to people, you know, like, and things like that. It's just the little things. And I think that's where you have to get clever on how you go about it. You know, anyone that says like, oh yeah, just give everything away for free and hope that money comes. That's a great recipe for a family business. Like it's at the end of the day, it's just not going to work out. So there's a fine line. But like you said, I do think that like there's ways, if you can provide value in non-monetary ways, that's going to benefit you, right? Because it comes back in a monetary way. And so like think about in your business, like how could you add value in a non-monetary way, like something that doesn't cost you anything. And so in the internet world, we always think about like, say like a guidebook or a PDF or some kind of course, right? And so like, if you're Al's hardware store, like what kind of DIY plans could we, you know, put out there? What kind of, you know, help projects, right? Or things that are like, yeah, we could create a video series, which is kind of overdone, but like we could create a video series and it's a one-time cost that's going to last forever, you know, or like what's the cheapest version of that? And so like instead of like saying like, oh, we're just going to discount products, like how do we add value without spending a bunch of money, right? And so if that's a very high margin product that we can add, that's a way to do it. That's not a bad way to do it. But like what is the free version of that? Like what's the downloadable guidebook to making your own picnic table? You know, just like off the top of my head, things like that, that's going to provide value to the community. You know, and even in events, like that's the really cool thing about retail stores is that you can do these events. And so like, you know, Ace Hardware is pretty good at doing events all the time, right? And like getting the community involved. And in a world that's getting increasingly harder and harder to get the community involved in things, like you have to make that extra effort. And and then hopefully that comes back in sales. And there's ways you can try to like, utilize this event to gain new customers, right? But I think by and large, the focus should be like, how do we provide value to this community so that they'll come back to this store?
Yeah. I have one final question for you, Cody, and that is, if I know that you have a ton of ideas and a ton of advice trapped in that brain of yours, and with all the businesses that you've been a part of and the ones that you have seen from the outside looking in, with whether it's with friends or different acquaintances that you have, what do you think would be one piece of advice you would give someone that perhaps has plateaued in their business, is just starting out, that could better their business?
That's a good question. I think the number one thing, like as we talk about adding all this value, I think the quicker you can add lifetime value on your books, the better. So what I mean by that, you need to find a product, whether it's your core product or not, like you need to find a way to increase the lifetime value of a customer, because customers are getting more and more expensive to acquire. And when like, as we just get done saying like, stop focusing all on the numbers, I'm saying, focus on your numbers in this way, like focus on increasing that lifetime value with an early product. That's something that I learned from super spammy internet marketers that holds true in solid businesses is like, how do I increase the value of this customer early and more often? And I think you can do that in a non-spammy way and by creating the thing that they want. So I'll give you an example out of our business. So with the Ideas Lab, we launched this Ideas Lab, and I instantly gave away 2 courses that are worth, like $700. Could we make more money by selling them? Yes, but I'd rather give them away and get that higher value right there. And so now I can corner myself as a premier membership by giving away this free value. So there's the thing that I added, a super high value, this $500 course that I'm giving you for free, right? That's something that's going to add value, add perceived value to the entire piece, and then allows me to corner this as like, hey, we're a premier membership, right? And like, that's just kind of a rough example off the top of my head, is like, how do we add value? But how do we also increase the lifetime value of that customer?
Cody Rich from the Rich Outdoors podcast, also the Rich Ideas Lab, Backcountry Fuels, all kinds of different things that Cody Rich has going on. I'll tag them all in the show notes below. Cody, thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.